Hi everyone, so I am very excited to be sharing 3 different concepts for a Natasha Denona 15 pan retro palette. So I had a couple of people request that I do this when I had done my Deeping the Vibes for the mini retro palette, and nothing really hit me inspiration wise. I've done a fantasy palette video, palettes I wish existed, for Natasha Denona. This is a series that I started a couple of years ago, so this video is like 2 years old at this point. I will try and link it down below or in the cards. But that was a video where I did complete new mock-ups of palettes I wish existed for Natasha Denona. Then I got a couple comments on Instagram. This comment in particular really stood out to me and really just inspired me, and immediately it all clicked and it all came together really quickly. It doesn't always happen that way for me with these sort of fantasy palettes. Sometimes I will work on things for a long time and I'm just not inspired. But this concept really inspired me, just thinking of a mini retro palette expanded, what it would look like, but also what it would look like with things that I already have. So I'm not creating 3 versions of the same thing. I'm actually looking at it in 3 different ways. So I made a complete Natasha Denona original sort of mock-up. Then I took single shadows and put 15 together to create a different, somewhat similar, but still different shadows for a 15 pan sort of retro inspired thing. And then I actually looked within my own Natasha Denona existing palettes and rearranged those in order to create 15 pans. Now, my Natasha Denona large palette collection is limited. I have 4, not including the Metropolis palette, which has smaller pans, and then I have 2 of the mini pans. So I could only work with what I had. So it's very muted, it's very neutral. So I'll just show you what my sort of retro palette would look like, just solely based off of the things I already have. Now, missing things like the Safari palette and the Biba palette really affect the way that this would look if I had a complete Natasha collection, because their shades, immediately I'm thinking of Marilyn from the Biba palette, Sculpture from the Marilyn, or from the Biba palette. Those would be beautiful additions to sort of a mock, or like my own creative vision of a retro palette, like what that would look like. But for this one, I just took things from the Lila, from the Sunset, from the Gold, and from the Tropic. So there's a little bit of everything here. I wanted to have some neutral shades. I'll explain more about the shades that I picked with my original sort of mock-up. This was just, I kind of wanted to go in order from like almost my least favorite to my favorite. Not that I don't like this, it just doesn't inspire me as much as the other color schemes, but I was just working with what I had with sort of the brown shades in lieu of any gray. I went with sort of softer peachy shades and the one blue shade as like that one pop of color, because the other sort of colorful shades I had didn't really work as well for that sort of retro vibe that I was going for. So it's with this, I want to stress as well, it's not about the colors that I picked, and I won't be going into detail with the single shadows I picked because that's not the point. It's the inspiration behind like the color story, and I was just really inspired to share that and not just kind of like the individual shadows. But this is sort of the first version of a 15 pan retro palette because it has some variations of white and yellow, sort of paler shades, a pale blue. I feel like it could work for a very simplistic retro sort of feel, but it's definitely more of like a modern retro instead of a truly closely inspired. Now, my 15 pan inspiration, I think, rings a little closer to colors that we are used to seeing with retro. So I'm being careful. This is a MAC palette. Not all of the shadows in this palette are from MAC, so I'm just kind of carefully holding it up here. But this color story is very spring, and it really inspires me because of the variations of colors. This is the palette I used to create my eye look today, which I know is kind of rough and I'm kind of like falling apart here, but I was very excited and I really just wanted to do this, and I wanted to try and challenge myself to do sort of a different kind of eye look than I would normally do. So I used these 2 colors here in this. I kind of used this little quad here, which is actually a little bit of inspiration from my mock-up, my original mock-up that kind of, the way I did things was the mock-up first, and then this, and then the Natasha, which is kind of probably why it's the reverse order for my favorites. But it's a mix of mattes, it's a mix of metallics. Cool tone shadows were actually very popular and in trend in the 60s. When you look at sort of the kinds of shadows that people were using, if you look at makeup ads, and there's only so much you can get from sort of model pictures, but it really gives you a general idea. And a lot of people wore, if they wore color, it was pale, muted colors. It was blues and greens and pink and purple. Those were really the colors that you saw, besides like white, gray, black. Those were sort of the staples, and brown, of course. So I wanted to do a play on that with some very typical colors that you would see, like the green and the blue and different shades of pink, but just different finishes. Matte shadows were really the thing in the 60s for actual 60s makeup. It was about matte. It was very eye focused, but it was a lot about liner and lashes in general, and like very like light washes of color. So sort of things that you're kind of seeing becoming popular now, or like becoming popular again now. The trend's kind of coming around, and so I wanted to take various shades of the blue and the green and the pink, but have different finishes. So like a sort of shimmery sort of purple, and have shimmery pink, and just kind of think of it as like a modern way, also just using what I have, right? So like very pastel light colors, things that reminded me of spring and lightness, but also had the same general sort of 60s color scheme, because even though it's retro and it's not, retro doesn't have to mean the 60s. I'm going with 60s as my direct inspiration. There was a shadow in the mini retro palette called 60s, so it was leaning me more towards those 60s vibes as opposed to like retro 70s or 50s. It was really sticking me with 60s. So I feel like this sort of represents that a little bit with some of those other fun sort of colors that you wouldn't necessarily see, like, you know, silver and gold. But this is the kind of stuff that inspires me, and this might be something that I revisit once I move on from some of the like eyeshadow painting projects I'm doing. But this is just looking at this, it's a very happy, springy color story. So I really wanted to share that with people, and if anybody is curious and would like to know the exact shades that are in here, let me know, and I will take pictures and swatches and post them on my Instagram stories. I don't want that to kind of be the focus of the videos I do. I don't really want to be like recommending things to people or selling things, because I don't have a lot of experience with all of these shadows. As you can probably tell from just looking at them, a lot of my singles aren't very used, so I don't really want to be saying good or bad things about things that I might have only used a handful of times. So anyway, there is a variety of shadows in here. There are MAC shadows, there are a variety of indie shadows like Sydney Grace, Luxie Beauty, M Cosmetics. I think there might even be a Makeup Geek shadow in here. Just a variety of different things. So I like the color story, and maybe that gives you some inspiration, but it is possible to kind of pull some of that stuff out of things you already have. You know, just shopping my stash for things and just going through and organizing things was so much fun. Now, the main thing I wanted to talk about in this video is my mock-up. So this is what I created, and the inspiration just hit me so fast when I started working on it, and I love this palette. Like I think this is one of my favorite fantasy palettes that I've ever created, and I really tried to put myself in that kind of Natasha Denona mindset about how she sort of arranges her palettes, and I wanted to think about the color story as retro, but also like, again, with different finishes, with different things you could do with it. So you could go sort of like costumey retro very easily with those kind of colors, but you could also do a lot of very modern looks and nobody would know it was from like a retro inspired palette. Like, it's not a costume palette, it really is just a palette that you could use for everyday usage, but you could still use it for like a 60s costume party because it would have those similar tones. So I actually thought about this palette quite a bit and rearranged it a little bit, and you can see the rows. So each row of 5 has its own color story, and then each column again has its own color story. So you could look at it in terms of like 5 shadows you could use together. You could look at the rows of 3 that you could use together, Or you could even look at it as little quads. I even looked at it that way. So you could look at it, so I just sort of like broke it down by the top row where you can see those little 4 shadow groups. And that really inspired me. This is like giving me endless inspiration for like different color combinations to play with and different sort of eye looks. And I was thinking about like what I would pair with what and what kind of styles, and just wishing like I had different people I could put makeup on. I don't like my eye shape because it's so difficult to like do anything, and I was struggling like hard to get this to work for me today. I also have a little bit of psoriasis on my eyelids again, so it makes it really difficult to like do anything on my eyelids, and I really wish I had other people I could play with and just do makeup on other people basically. And I was thinking about all different kind of eye looks and different eye shapes and skin tones and what things would look like, and getting inspiration from different 60s eye looks that were like on celebrities, and then also looking at 60s makeup ads, 60s eyeshadow palettes, like those sort of color schemes of it being retro without like costumey retro. Like I feel like a ColourPop 60s palette would probably have that sort of like orange, green, mustardy sort of palette covering, and like probably a lot of those colors as well, like more like 60s decor as opposed to like 60s makeup, because I feel like a lot of people don't really know about 60s makeup except for the modern twists that they see. So I feel like this works because there are shades in here that are pretty true to 60s. Like, so I kept the matte colorful shades pretty true, the aqua, blue, you know, you have a light green, you have a light pink. That's very true to sort of actual shades. I had to have a black shade and a brown because a lot of graphic liner, just like a lot of eye focus stuff was really the thing for 60s eye looks. But then I wanted to have a silver as well. There's something about silver that makes me think of the 60s, probably because there was a lot of focus sort of back in the 50s and 60s about like what the future would be like, and you would see a lot of like silver used in that. So I wanted to have like a pale gold, because I love gold, but I wanted a pale gold that I felt would pair well with other colors. So you could really use like that first column of the pale gold and the brown and the almost sort of mustardy shade as a very simple eye look. But then you could pair that gold with some of those other shades like the blue and the green, and you have like a matte deep red, which you could use for sort of the graphic liner as well, like the navy blue, which is what I went with today. But that was my sort of inspiration, was that sort of middle column with the silver and the aqua green and the navy blue. I just really like that color combo, and it's not necessarily accurate to like 60s makeup, but there's little aspects of it, and it depends on what you do. You can make it scream retro, or you can do very modern things. It could be modern and simplistic or very dramatic. So I wanted a couple like unique things there as well, like that sort of, I imagine it would be like a purple duochrome. So in the first column, that would be like a duochrome sort of shade, because Natasha Denona does those so well. And I love the subtle reflex of shades. So having some metallic shades in there, like a metallic pink and a metallic blue, gives you those options, but you still have the matte versions as well. So I really love this color story so much. I really wish this was a real palette. It's incredibly inspiring to me to think about sort of a retro color story and what that would look like, and I love doing these palettes I wish existed videos. It's just purely fantasy. I'm not saying I'm an expert in any field, I just truly have fun doing this. I really enjoy thinking of color stories. I really enjoy putting these kind of things together. Just playing with color in general is something that I really like doing and have always liked doing. So that's what inspires me. I'm just thinking of that 15 pan retro, and I just ran with it. So hopefully this inspires you in some way. Maybe it encourages you to bring out some of the palettes or shadows that you have that maybe you haven't used in a while. I would love to know how you would use this kind of palette. What kind of things would you do with it? Like if somebody just handed you this, what would you create? What are the first things you would do? Or what would be like the first shadows you would swatch? What kind of things come to mind? Because I would love to get some inspiration from you as well. I love hearing everybody's ideas for different eye looks and different shapes and styles, and what sort of gets their attention first as well. It makes me think of things in different ways, which is also why I like doing videos like this and talking about my sort of visions and ideas, because it's so much fun to hear from other people. If you had to do your own 15 pan retro palette, what would you include? What would you do differently than I did? I'm very curious as well. I just love hearing from you guys and what inspires you, and just if you have any other ideas for maybe other 15 pan kind of titles or concept ideas, share them with me. I really think it's a lot of fun to just do these sort of fantasy things, and it costs nothing. You just get to work with your imagination and play with different things, and occasionally do a little bit of research, which I love doing. So I was so inspired to do this video, and I'm very grateful for all the people who requested this, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Thank you so much for watching and hanging it with me today. I really appreciate it, and I hope we get a chance to chat soon. Bye for now.